Welcome to the UK Travel Planning Podcast. Your host is the founder of the UK travel planning website, Tracy Collins. In this podcast, Tracy shares destination guides, travel tips, and itinerary ideas, as well as interviews with a variety of guests who share their knowledge and experience of UK travel to help you plan your perfect UK vacation. Join us as we explore the UK from cosmopolitan cities to quaint villages, from historic castles to beautiful islands, and from the picturesque countryside to seaside towns.
Hi and welcome to episode 111 of the UK Travel Planner Podcast. This week I had the pleasure of welcoming friend and fellow podcaster Amanda Kendle to chat with me all about her recent UK trip and to reflect on how being a thoughtful traveller enhanced her experiences before, during and after her trip. So without further ado, let's hear Amanda's UK trip report.
Thanks for having me, Tracy. It is lovely to be here. I'm Amanda Kendle from the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, and I was lucky enough to be in the UK a couple of months back, earlier this year in April. And as a whole, our trip was centred on going to a dear friend's wedding, which was to take place in the Lake District. So as soon as we got this invitation, first of all, a very close friend, and second of all, like, how exciting to be able to go to a wedding in the Lake District. And we looked up the venue and it was like, looks like a little castle of a hotel on the water. Like, this is just so perfect. So that was the reason, the impetus for that trip. I was traveling with my son, who's 14 and a mad keen footballer / soccer player. And so we knew we were going to start in Manchester, where he had actually been last year for a soccer trip. And he had some ideas. He wanted to do some more soccer tourism, let's call it. So we started in Manchester, a few days there, a few days in Liverpool. And then we spent about a week with our friends a little bit further north and around the Lake District, celebrated the wedding and had an absolute blast. Came back down to northern Wales for a few days, also because we wanted to go to Wrexham because football, and then back to Manchester for a few more days. And so that was it. So fairly small kind of footprint of area where we covered.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I was following along when you were traveling, which was really fantastic. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, which I think is really important, and if listeners have listened to the Global Travel Planner podcast initial episode, you will recognize Amanda's voice because she does an introduction, in fact, a whole episode about thoughtful travel. So this episode, it would be totally remiss of me to talk to Amanda without asking her to explain what thoughtful travel involves and to talk about how that impacted her when she planned her trip, during her trip and after her trip, because I think it's probably a great way to kind of structure it that way, Amanda. So would you like to just kind of give us an overview of what is involved in thoughtful travel?
I would absolutely love to. So, and it's really cool to be able to do it in the context of one specific trip. So I'm very excited to talk about this. So when I think about thoughtful travel, I mean, there's no single definition of thoughtful travel, but let's just say it's making our decisions more intentionally, thinking about what we want to get out of a trip, how we can do it so it's good for us and good for the world, so to speak. So that's kind of thoughtful travel in a nutshell. And then when I try to break it down, I always think about how we can be thoughtful about our trip before, during and after the trip. So I'm happy to talk to that if you like, Tracy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's really funny because we did a massive trip last year to 5 destinations, 6 destinations around the world. And we're actually sitting now with the after, trying to be thoughtful about it, going through all of those things, thinking about, because it's so easy now we're planning another trip to forget about that.
So true.
And I know in my Facebook group, I'm always constantly asking people, share your best memory from your trip. Share your favorite photo from your trip. And it's about that kind of reminder. So let's talk about then how you kind of were thoughtful in your planning before you went to the UK.
Yes, absolutely. So a precursor is perhaps I try not to do much planning. So I know some people like to have like day to day, every part planned, and I don't. But I have accepted that in the modern world, it is more important to have more things planned than like 10 or 20 years ago. So I do a bit of both. But first of all, I did a bit of brainstorming with my son what do we want to see? We know we're going to fly into Manchester and we know we have the wedding up at the Lake District. What's nearby? What can we do? And it was great because he was there last year when he was 13. So he already had some ideas about what he wanted to show me that he'd seen and what he had missed out on. So that was really fun to be able to have his total buy-in from the start. So we did actually do some bookings related to that because he convinced me, and probably it's true that some of the stadium tours would be booked out if we didn't book in advance. So I reluctantly locked those in and then locked in accommodation kind of connected to that in Manchester and Liverpool for our first stint in Manchester and our second stint in Liverpool. So I did that. And then the other thing I usually do before a trip is lots of reading and watching, but not of like where will I go and what will we do, but stuff that's just connected, like stuff that's set in those destinations or movies, Netflix series, travelogues or just novels or whatever, because I really feel that gives it just gives you a taste of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Different perspective than kind of, I mean, you can go on YouTube and watch somebody walk around it and do those sorts of things. And I get that. But yeah, I totally am with you about reading a book set in that area. And there's so many fantastic UK TV series that you could watch. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
And that really gives you kind of the feel for an area and the nitty gritty of an area as well, because it's not prettified up, is it?
Yeah, it's like real life.
Yeah.
But and it's not from a travel perspective necessarily, which I really like as well. So I didn't do as much as usual, I must say. Partly perhaps also usually I do a lot of language learning, but I thought I'll probably be okay with these guys. The odd accent, notwithstanding. But so I didn't do any language learning this time, and life had been a bit hectic, so I didn't do as much research. But I did happen to have a fabulous guest on my podcast not long before we left who is kind of an expert in Wales. Although she's American, she spent lots of time in Wales. So have a fabulous book, which I'll mention again later in my during the trip phase. So we've done all of that and just got some more ideas together about the kinds of things we wanted to do, and made contact with friends who we knew lived in the area, which is one of my very, very favourite things about travel and also the podcast and the blog is that I've made friends all over the world. And so I knew who I could talk to that we could meet up with and, just get the insider perspective of, where do you shop? Where do you live? What do you do every day? What's this city like from your perspective, which I think is so special.
That's always such a privilege, I think, being able to do that. And we're doing the same. We're planning a trip to America in September, and I'm reaching out to all my friends in America going, so we're coming to Chicago, so we're coming to New York, so we potentially do this. And now everybody's going to meet up with us and show us around. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, absolutely. It's just the best. So that's about all I did. So we had a whole week or so in the middle, maybe 10 days where I didn't have solid plans. I did rent a car because we realised we needed to kind of get to our friend's parents' place in Wigan and from here to there and a bunch of places that was just going to be, I'd much prefer public transport, but I realised it was just going to be quite restrictive if we did that. And so then I thought, well, once we've got a car, I'm not booking the rest of the accommodation because it means we can go anywhere. We can decide a day before, a couple of days before. We'll just kind of follow our noses a bit. And I had checked, it wasn't like massive school holiday time or anything. So I thought, we'll be fine. I know some people freak out at that. And I had a friend who actually volunteered. She said, look, I've got some spare time. I could book your accommodation for you, Amanda. And I was like, no, I could do. It's not the point. I'm okay. Thanks, though. She was so stressed by it.
I know you asked in our Facebook group about that, and I think I did say to you as well that obviously depending on time of year, and I do say to people like if you're going to London at Christmas, like you need to book accommodation. Yeah. If you're going to even the Lake District in August, June, July, you're going to struggle because it's super popular. Like Cornwall, super popular. Those areas, Isle of Skye, whenever you want to go to the Isle of Skye, it seems to be booked up forever. So those sort of places you really have to be thinking ahead. But Doug and I used to jump on trains at weekends. And we would, depend on what the weather was like, we might get to somewhere and go, not so great. Let's just jump on another train and go somewhere else. And we'd do that, and then we'd book accommodation. I'd get on my phone and I'd book accommodation at 5 and stay in a B&B. And it was great. And I knew because the time of year you were doing it that you would be absolutely fine to do that. And you want to stay at the B&Bs and kind of, again, experience that kind of accommodation that I love to do.
Yeah, and I'm not into like the luxury hotel experience, At the end of the day, if it's just a bed, that's all I need. And then if it's a bit quirkier or more interesting, then that's a bonus. So, I love that. So that's all I did before the trip. Not much, really.
No, compared to sometimes some of the preparation. If you go into a country where you don't speak the language and that sort of thing, you need to do
more.
there's a lot more involved in that.
Yeah.
So tell me about during then. How, again, did you have that kind of thoughtful travel mindset when you were there?
So many ways. So probably my favorite way was catching up with friends. One of my long-term blogging, podcasting buddies, the Barefoot Backpacker, recently moved to Manchester, and I was like, oh, that's great, I can catch up with them. So we did a fabulous walking tour. Well, not a formal one, but we spent hours wandering Manchester. We went to Affleck's. We did all sorts of like just the nitty gritty, walk down to where they live, and like it just, when you've got a friend there, it's so nice to know, what's their everyday thing. So we did that kind of thing. And obviously we also hung out with our friends whose wedding we were going to and got to see. So our friend was marrying a man who grew up in that area. So we got to see, we went to his childhood home where his parents still live, and, that kind of stuff was just beautiful. And his parents were so welcoming, and that was, so lots of local people, which was, I know you can't always do that, but we made the most of our opportunities there. So that was one way. Another way was I always try and keep some kind of travel journal when I travel, because I think it helps me to stop and reflect each day. When I was like younger, my journals were so boring. They were just like detailed dot points or detailed boring sentences of every place we went. We did this, we ate this, and like I've learned that's, I still keep that information, but just quick dot points, because I often do want to refer back to that. But I try and focus more on like the things I remembered the most of the day. Like, I saw like a funny dog walking along, and, like something about, something that's like, we were staying in this place in Wales where they had a suspension bridge and they were doing some work on it. And it was just fascinating to watch. Like there was these people that were in harnesses hanging on the underside of the bridge working on it. I'm like, this is terrifying, and there's this river rushing below them, and also like just little things. So those kind of things go into my journal, and any feelings or things that I've learned, curious things. Often I'll make a list of my Google searches from the day, because inevitably when I'm traveling, especially if I'm traveling with my teenage son, there's so many questions like, why do they do this? What's this? What's that mean? And we'll Google stuff. And so I keep a list of that just out of curiosity, the weird things we've looked up. So yeah, journaling. And this time was good because I was traveling with my teenager. I actually had plenty of downtime most days, because a modern teenager needs time to just be on their phone or whatever, apparently. So it's good, because sometimes I've traveled with with my good friends, and then we're spending all our spare time talking, and I don't do my journaling. So that was nice. I did that.
Yeah.
What else was a during thing? As I kind of foreshadowed in that before bit, reading stuff set in those places. So I had this fabulous book by Pamela Petro called The Long Field, which is about her time in Wales and connection with Wales over the years. So she went to study her master's in Wales kind of by accident, one of those, didn't even know anything about it, turned up there, fell in love with it. And so that was a really interesting perspective and got me so interested in Wales. I was sitting in this little hotel in Llangollen. I can't pronounce that well, but that's my attempt. It looked like Langeland to me, but
sure, I can't pronounce it either. So.
But reading about her experiences, and it just because I hadn't known much about Welsh culture and Welsh language, and just learning more about that in this fascinating book. I loved that, and then I could kind of, when I bumped into people, ask them little questions to to learn even a little bit more. What else did we do that was thoughtful during the trip? I kind of mentioned that we would always spend several nights in every place, so I'd never want to stay somewhere just one night unless there's like a very good reason, but usually 2 or 3 nights, even on this trip, just to get to know the rhythm of a place a little bit. I'm in a perfect world, I would stay everywhere for weeks at a time. Sadly, life prevents that.
Wouldn't we all? I have to ask you, because something, we were a bit remiss here because we talked about language learning and you were in Wales.
That's true, actually. I should have learned some Welsh.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is because Doug spent some time in North Wales last year doing some research, and he came back with a full vocabulary. I was quite proud of him. He actually learned some before he went, and he practiced it when he was there, and he came back, and I was like, wow. Yes. So yeah, that would be that's something I was thinking about. Not only that, because I'd love to read that book, because I was on that same podcast episode on your podcast.
That's right.
Talking about language learning. So,
Yes, exactly.
and I was fascinated because Wales, I was like, wow, that's so unusual.
Yeah.
So yes, I'd like to read that book for sure.
Yeah, you're right. And I in hindsight, I wish I had done more of that. And since we came home, one of the YouTubers that my son follows, actually, I didn't even know. I thought he was English. Turns out he's Welsh. Sorry. And he had this series of videos where he went to somewhere in South America. I'm not sure now. Argentina, somewhere where there's a big Welsh community. Somewhere in South America. I don't think it's Argentina. Maybe it's more east. Anyway, some country in South America, I'm so sorry, where there's a really significant Welsh community. And he went there on these series of videos we watched, and he'd found all these people he could speak Welsh with and I was like, there's just so much more to this culture than I knew about. So now I just want to go back again, to be honest. So I would have to learn some more.
I think you should, and a little bit of Welsh. We'll both learn a little bit of Welsh next time. Before, I'm not sure when I'm going to Wales next, but yes, that after Doug kind of showed me up with his excellent Welsh, I was like, wow.
Good on him. Yeah,
I know. I was very impressed.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that is very impressive. So yeah, I was remiss there. What else did I do? I guess the other thoughtful thing was just having in mind my kind of thoughtful travel principles wherever I am and whatever I'm seeing, and following my nose, following rabbit holes, and just I try not to be a ticker box. I'm here, so I have to see X, Y, and Z sites kind of traveller. I prefer to, just see what's around, and often just take what's in front of me. So on our last few days in Manchester before we flew out, so we had another few days there, and by this time we'd actually both got a bit sick, so we were taking things fairly slowly, and we ended up in a hotel directly opposite the art gallery, the main Manchester art gallery. And my son was particularly not, fairly unwell that day. He didn't need supervision, but he didn't want to go out, so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to the art gallery. He was very happy to stay in the hotel room, and I really just went because it was there, but then I got inside and I was like, this is like the most thoughtful art gallery I've ever seen. And they'd done all these really interesting things just in the last 2 or 3 years mostly, where they'd like re-curated some of their exhibitions through like modern, very thoughtful lenses, like colonialism. So they'd got a bunch of paintings that were basically kind of really like, hey, look, we're the great colonialists, and they'd reinterpreted them and put really interesting captions next to them to say, hey, this is what was it like at the time, and now we think this, and that kind of thing. And then there was one gallery where they reinterpreted kind of climate change issues, but just using their old collection, like paintings they'd had for 50, 100 years, and then put this other lens on. It was so interesting. And then one more where they had actually got collected everything that the curators had put together to put this exhibition on, including the post-it notes and the drawings and the sketches and the some transcriptions from the discussions they'd had, and put that as part of the exhibition as well. So that was super fascinating and really, really thoughtful. So big tick to the Manchester Art Gallery.
Yeah, that does sound amazing as well. And I also love the fact that, sometimes you can have your plans if that's where you want to travel, and and I'm very much I like to know what I'm going to see. So I kind of travel with that going, I really would like to go and see X, Y, and Z, but also have the flexibility to, if something crops up, I can go, actually, I want to spend some more time here, or I want to go and have a look at that particular place, or this looks interesting, I'm going to wander into this church, or whatever. Having the ability to do that, I think it is important. And also, like you say, just what you discovered by kind of wandering across the road, it was like, a total gem that you didn't expect.
Yeah, and it didn't say that online anywhere that it was this amazing place. I just looked it up and it's just an art gallery. But actually, it was way more. So I've been telling everyone about that. That's like probably my biggest tip that I've been giving people is, you have to go to the Manchester Art Gallery. It's amazing. And maybe it's just very specific to me that I would like it like that. But I loved it. It was amazing. So.
Hi, it's Tracy here. Just popping in to say, if you're enjoying the UK Travel Planning Podcast, I have some exciting news. Why not join us on the Global Travel Planning Podcast, where we bring you travel inspiration, itinerary ideas, real-life adventures, and practical tips to make your travel dreams a reality. We've already explored Japan, Vietnam, Queensland, and Switzerland, with more thrilling destinations coming up. So tune in on your favourite podcast app and embark on a global adventure with us. No, it's great. We all like different things, and we all look for different things, and you know, and that's great as well. And so I actually want to ask about your son as well. How was he during the trip? I know he'd been there last year because he went on a football trip. I can't say soccer because Doug would tell me off.
No, it's okay. Fair.
Football trip, even though soccer is an English word, British word, whatever. It did actually come from, we invented it, but now it's all football. But anyway, so how did he enjoy it? What was his like experience of the trip? Because last year he went with a football
with a team
group.
Yes.
This year went with his mom.
Yes. I know. How embarrassing, right?
So how was that?
No. I mean, you know, a teenager doesn't always want to hang out with their mum the whole time, but the friends that we caught up with, he got along really well. Some of them he knew, some he didn't. He got along really well with all of them, and I think he's been raised a traveller. He's a very curious teenager, and loves to meet all kinds of different people, and you know, learn from them. I think, and just see how people live. So those parts especially were good, and I was very careful to make sure that we had a fairly heavy soccer/football rating in some of the things we were doing the rest of the time. And I found them interesting too. Like, so he would enjoy a stadium tour for different reasons to me. For me, like often in their museums or in the guides would be these old guys who'd been, attending matches there since they were 5 years old or probably before and stuff. And they would have amazing stories. So I loved hearing all of that. And he was probably less interested in that and more in, getting down near the pitch or whatever, seeing his idols, big, pictures of his idols or whatever. So, yeah, I think that kind of compromise approach worked really well. And, and he had a great trip. At the wedding, he was on the dance floor till midnight. So I reckon he was having a good time.
Well, it sounds like it. So since you've been back, so it was April, May that you were there, wasn't it?
Yes,
so it's a few months ago. Yeah. So since you've been back, how have you used the kind of thoughtful travel ideas to be thoughtful when you're reflecting back on your trip?
So I think one of the things about being thoughtful after your trip, or one of the most important things is extending the memory of it, I suppose. So, obviously because we live together and the two of us went, we often will talk back about, oh, remember we did this or remember we did that. And I love being able to do that. I've also got a good chunk of friends who are always really keen to hear about my trips. Plenty of people don't want to hear. That's totally fine. But there are some who will be, and I was like, yes, look at this, and here's what we did. And we've got photos pinned up. I print some photos. We don't do that often enough these days, but I love to do that because they're just, you walk past them on the wall and yes, you're, transported back there. I haven't done this yet, but I'm intending to give it to my teenager for a school holiday task this week. Is we'll often make a photo book, so we've got it's like a physical book we can look back on and enjoy that. And I've just been doing a lot more reading and research. Like I mentioned, we went deep into this YouTuber's Welsh background and videos and things like that. And I actually just yesterday got Pamela Petro's second book in the mail because she did a really interesting world trip, including to South America and some half a dozen other places around the world where there are Welsh-speaking communities. And so she, quite a few years ago did this trip. I know, what a cool way to plan a trip. And so she went to speak Welsh all around the world, which is so unique. So I'm looking forward to reading that and, learning more about the Welsh cultural side of things. So yeah.
I just love that. I have to say, Amanda, I absolutely love that. I just love that. It's just fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. So, I need to read a first book before I got the second one, but I'm already hooked just at the idea of it. It's just fabulous.
I know,
absolutely
right?
Fabulous. Yeah. I mean, I'm also curious now to know how many Welsh-speaking communities there are around the world.
I know, right? Who knew? I did not know, so...
Exactly. And that's isn't it? That's the thing with travel, is it kind of opens up a Pandora's box of just amazingness that you just do not necessarily. You might plan your trip and think, I'm going to do A, B, C, and I'm going to go to D, whatever. And then along the way, you meet people, you talk to people, you have experiences that you can't plan for, they just happen. When you're, at the pre-planning phase, I know in our Facebook group, and we help people with consults, we make friends with people. We just love it. It's fantastic. And then when the travel and sharing those memories, talking about what's happening, and then And I guess I'm facilitating that through the podcast as well, because we have so many guests that come on and do their trip reports. And we've we've actually been told, and it's lovely, for a lot of our guests who've been on the podcast, that I have this in perpetuity now.
It's like a souvenir, isn't it?
I can listen to it when I want. I've got this. And it's, and it's, I love being able to kind of, it is so special. And it's just so lovely to hear about your trip, Amanda. Honestly, it was so good following you when you were doing the trip, but I knew that there would be so much more to talk to you about.
For me, a trip lasts forever. And like when I'm traveling, for example, I'll post on Instagram stories a lot, but I don't post like proper Instagram pictures. And I do all of that when I'm home. And I've only just last week or so got to the end of my UK trip on Instagram. And so then, I'll just do, 3 or 4 a week. And just the process of like kind of distill down what were the most important moments, and then try and be thoughtful in my caption. And, I love that process as well. It's kind of, it's reliving it, but it's also making me think a bit more deeply about it, which I love doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fantastic. So do you want to just share with our listeners about where we can find your podcast? And obviously you've got a website, and you do have a Facebook group, and I've just joined yesterday. You've got a LinkedIn group for anybody who's interested in there, but obviously just it kind of introduce that to our listeners.
Yes. So you can find the Thoughtful Travel podcast in all the podcast apps, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all of the little ones. And you'll find out more about it at my website, which is notaballerina.com. And as Tracy mentioned, there's a Facebook group, Thoughtful Travellers, and a LinkedIn group, Thoughtful Travellers. If you search for them, you'll find my podcast logo there. So there's lots of fun to be had in there and lots of thoughtfulness. And I'm Amanda Kendle on Instagram.
Yeah, you are. And I follow you on all of those and thoroughly enjoy it. So it's always good to speak to you, Amanda. It really is. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing about your trip. And I'm hoping if you're listening to this podcast, thinking about how you can kind of use some of those things that Amanda thought through when she was planning a trip and during a trip and after a trip to kind of make the trip just that little bit more thoughtful.
And can I add?
Yes.
Just to reiterate perhaps a bit, but because a lot of people are like, no, I want to travel my way and I want to plan everything. I want to do this or whatever. And it's totally fine. But I challenge people just to think about one way they might be able to make their trip a bit more thoughtful, even if it's just to watch a TV series before they go that's set there, or, something like to not plan a couple of days and spontaneously book when you're there, caveats above included. But just try. You can do it as small as you want just to see if that traveling style suits you more.
So, Amanda, always end this podcast with exactly the same question, as all our listeners know, and they're all poised because they know exactly what I'm going to ask you. So what was your one tip that you would share with anyone planning a trip to the UK?
Well, I feel like I have just given like 1,000 ideas that are big ideas. So I have a very, very simple and selfish idea. Well, selfish for my stomach. So what I discovered in the UK was that supermarket sandwiches are delicious. And I don't know if anyone's already given that tip, and I'm so sorry if they have. But especially at Tesco, I checked back on my photographs to tell you this, Tracy. It's very important. Miso chicken and pickled slaw sandwich. The best. I had I had one 3 days in a row because they were so good, and I wish I'd discovered them earlier in my trip. I would have eaten miso chicken and pickled slaw Tesco sandwiches every day. So, in Australia, I would never go to the supermarket to get lunch, but I discovered that was fantastic, and that would keep us going, and we only had to have one meal a day. So, and I love going to supermarkets. It's a thoughtful thing to do, to explore supermarkets. So, yeah,
it so is. It's one of my favourite things to do. And that's a great tip, because going into the supermarkets, again, if you're on a budget, it's fantastic because you can go and buy a meal deal, sandwich, drink, packet of crisps, piece of fruit, piece of chocolate, something healthy, whatever you want to go with it. But you usually get the 3 items. I have a personal favourite, which is the Marks and Spencer's kind of, it's like a luxury prawn sandwich. And I ate so many last time that I just couldn't eat any more after a while. But I think I'm ready for a prawn sandwich in Marks and Spencer's. So that's what I will be doing when I get back in. So it's good to know. I will try one of the, tell me again which sort it was.
I know, it's very specific. Miso chicken and pickled slaw sandwich, right. Tesco.
I will make a note, Amanda. And
Please try and let me know.
Yeah, so again, thanks so much for coming on. It's been always a pleasure to talk to you. So yeah, thanks
you so much for having me. It was so fun to be able to talk about this trip this way. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the UK Travel Planning Podcast. As always, show notes can be found at uktravelplanning.com. If you've enjoyed the show, why not leave us feedback via text or a review on your favourite podcast app? We love to hear from you, and you never know, you may receive a shout out in a future episode. But as always, that just leaves me to say, until next week, happy UK travel planning.